Okay, so good day everyone. Welcome to Unit 2, Factors that Affect Reading the Reader. I am Anjanette A. Dalino, the reporter. So let's discuss the Module 6, which is all about the physiological development and reading. So first, let us read the objectives. So after studying this module, you should be able to first, explain how physical health, vision, reading, and neurological factors affect reading performance. Second, describe the nature of some reading or language disabilities, especially dyslexia. And third, draw implications from physical or physiological factors for education in general and for reading instruction in particular. Okay, so let's start. So reading is both physical and physiological, right? So functions such as vision, hearing, and thought are possible only through the organs of the body. So if the organ is defective, the functions is likely to be impaired. So impairment, especially in the case of vision, hearing, and thinking, leads to serious reading difficulties. Generally, good health is conducive to good reading, and poor health often causes reading difficulties. So let's move on to the first topic, which is all about physical health and reading. So no direct relationship may be said to exist between reading disability and physical health. However, it is obvious that a child who is ill is not able to do well in school. Physical inadequacies may result in lowered vitality, depletion of energy, slower physical development, and therefore mental retardation. So studies have shown that children who are hungry and malnourished have difficulty learning because they cannot concentrate. They also lack drive. So severe malnutrition in infancy may lower children's IQ scores. So the lack of protein in an infant's diet may adversely affect his or her ability to learn. Another is a child who is ill. They does not usually do well in school, not because of the illness itself, but because of the child is out of school often. So they misses a lot of learning opportunities. So learning to read is difficult for many children. The teacher, should therefore scrutinize any condition that adds to this difficulty. Like for example, why are some kids are hyperactive? What may be the reason why some cannot concentrate? So a child whose eyes are glazed, who seems sleepy, and who actually falls asleep in class may need a physical checkup. So if this case happen, we the teacher should refer the child to a medical personnel and discuss the child's behavior with his or her parents. So we must also be careful in making inferences about a student's behavior. We must be cautious about making any diagnosis about a child's physical health. Finally, we should also exercise care in interpreting the relationship between physical factors to reading deficiency. So, generally, physical inadequacies are contributory factors rather than factors that causing reading problems. So, let's move on to the second topic, which is the perceptual factors and reading. So, reading is a complex process, and reading difficulty is usually due to multiple causes rather than a single one. So, in learning to read, children needs auditory and visual perceptual skills, in addition to skills in language and concept development. So, in this section, we will examine some of the visual and auditory factors that influence the reading performance of a child. So, visual adequacy. Since reading requires the sense of sight, a visual deficit is certain to affect a child's ability to read. However, a visual problem is not always obvious and may not be detected. In visual acuity, you do not need to have a 20 over 20 vision to read well. After all, Reading is a near point task. To read the average book, you only need 20 over 60 visual acuity. So Dechant 1964 enumerated that what a reader must do visually in order to read efficiently. So first, they must coordinate the eyes. Second, move along a line of print. Third, make proper return sweeps. See clearly and distinctly both near and far. Change focus. Fuse the impression of each eye into a single image. Have visual memory for what have seen. Have good hand and eye coordination. And accurately perceive size and distance relationship. So the young child entering school may still have immature vision. It is said that children often may be visually ready for reading only at the age of 8. So when their eyes become structurally complete. So let's move on to the visual defects. Even when children become visually ready at the age of 8, as I have said earlier, numerous visual defects may occur. And this includes the refractive errors and binocular errors. So let us talk first about the refractive errors. So many people suffer from errors in refraction, especially the myopia, hyperopia, and astigmatism. So myopia or nearsightedness is the most common among the refractive errors. So it is a nearsightedness. A myopic individual can see near objects clearly, but distant objects appear blurred to them. A myopic eye is too long. This forces the reader to hold the book closer because they are nearsighted. Then the hyperopia or the farsightedness. So if the myopia is nearsightedness, hyperopia is farsightedness or having difficulty focusing on near objects. So hyperopic eye is too short and the images falls behind the retina. Next is the astigmatism. It is the inability to bring the light rays to a single focal point, causing some part of an object to be focused while others are not. So, vision in astigmatism, the vision of a child is blurred. The reader with an astigmatism tires easily and usually dislikes close work or prolonged distant vision. Next is the binocular difficulties. So binocular difficulties, it commonly gives the child a double image. Either the two eyes do not aim correctly or they give conflicting image. So when the defect is minor, the individual may compensate. When the defect is major, the child may see two images so badly blurred and sees neither image clearly. So that there are types of binocular difficulties. First is the strabismus or the muscular imbalance, which results from the lack of coordination of the muscles that move the eyeball. Okay, so in strabismus, the eyes aim in different directions. So the one eye may aim too far outward and the other eye may aim too far inward. So a reader with strabismus tires is easily. He becomes irritable, loses his place, and omits and regresses. Then, second is lack of fusion. It has symptoms like slowness in reading. And then the anisekonia, which occurs when the size or shape of the two ocular image is not the same. So, symptoms of eye disturbances. Symptoms of visual problems are of three types. First, the avoidance symptoms, which is like avoiding reading task. Avoidance. They avoid reading task. Second, behavior symptoms like excessive blinking, squinting. Okay, so that's behavior, the behavior of the child. Third is complaints. So it is like dizziness, the double vision. So, a reading teacher should have more than just a general knowledge of eye defects. They should also be able to recognize the danger signs. Early detection of visual difficulty is imperative. So good vision means comfortable reading, right? So when the visual difficulty is corrected, the child will develop more favorable attitudes towards reading. So school achievements will most likely improve. So the educational implications. To interpret the relationship between visual defects and reading, you must consider the likelihood of multiple causation. Some children with defective vision become good readers, and some children without any visual difficulties have reading problems. So, visual defects present problems to both good and poor readers. But unless the child are suffering from severe vision problems, it would seem that they would not be significant factors in reading failure. So, nevertheless, we must remove any conditions that stand in the way of a child's progress. Corrective measures should be taken. Glasses or hearing devices could make a difference in attitude towards school and achievement. So, how can you help children with visual difficulties? Here are some suggestions. According to IMS 1951, 1959, and Dechant 1964. First, control the glare in the classroom. Next, do not block the light source. Third, arrange pupils in the classroom such that they are comfortable with the lighting, especially when they are reading. Fourth, use large sized materials. Fifth, write on the blackboard with large letters above children's eye level. Sixth, provide ample periods. Seventh, learn to use various screening tests. 8. Refer children to qualified professionals if necessary. So, visual discrimination. Visual discrimination is the ability to distinguish between written symbols. So, if pupils cannot discriminate between and among letters, they will not be able to read, especially true when they are taught a phonics approach. For example, if a child cannot see the difference between the M and the N, he will find it hard to learn which letter should be associated with the sound of M, which is diba? So in learning to read, children need to be able to make fine discrimination. Visual discrimination activities should involve letters and words rather than pictures or geometric figures. So transfer of learning is greater if the written symbols children work with are similar to those that they will meet in reading. So auditory adequacy. Auditory adequacy means three things: auditory acuity, auditory comprehension, and auditory discrimination. So first, an individual must be able to transmit the sound waves from the external brain to the auditory centers of the brain. He has auditory acuity if he can recognize the discrete unit of sound, and he must be able to understand, retain, and discriminate what he has heard. So testing hearing. The most satisfactory way of measuring hearing in school is through an audiometer. In such test, the child listens through an earphone and writes down the number he or she hears. So the numbers spoken with different degrees of loudness are played special on a phonograph. And from the child's written answers, the degree of hearing loss can be readily calculated. So there are two types of hearing loss: the conductive loss and the nerve loss. So conductive loss stems from an impairment in the conductive process in the middle ear, which reduces the child's hearing ability. So but if the loudness of the sound is increased, the child hears and understands. A child with conductive loss can hear his own voice through bone conduction, but the voices of others sound much softer than his own. Second, the nerve loss. It is caused by an impairment of the auditory nerve. So the child hears the speech of the others but may not understand what he hears. So in nerve loss, articulation is also affected. The child may speak too loudly or may speak in a monotone. He shows sign of frequently misunderstanding the teacher. So, what are the symptoms of hearing deficiencies? So, a hard of hearing child is usually inattentive. He turns his head towards the speaker, cupping his hand behind his ears. He asks others to repeat what they say. So when he listens to the radio or to the TV, the volume is exceptionally loud. He may also complain of ringing or buzzing in his ears. A hard of hearing child may be mistaken as stupid because his face has a blank expression. So some conditions that lead to progressively increasing deafness can be cured if treated early enough. Teachers should watch for signs of poor hearing in a child's general behavior. Children with inflamed or running ears should of course be referred for a medical treatment. So educational implications. Reading retardation occurs more frequently among with defective hearing than among children with normal hearing. So the teacher should not be satisfied with merely detecting auditory deficiencies. He cannot do much to improve the child's auditory acuity, but he can do much in developing the child's auditory discrimination skills. According to Dechant 1964, deaf children will have more difficulty reading than the hard of hearing. Okay, so now let us move on to the last topic, which is all about the brain and the reading. So reading is one of the most abstract and symbolic human activities. Thus, it requires brain that is functioning within normal limits. The result of research concerning the causal relationship between neurological deficits and reading difficulties are conflicting. Some researchers believe that some type of neurological dysfunction in the absence of brain damage causes difficulty in learning to read. So others report that known brain lesions, unless very severe, often do not retard learning, and that many children with veritable brain damage make good progress in reading, according to McGuinness and Smith 1982. So in recent years, however, there has been a marked tendency to relate neurological impairment to reading disability. So Harish mentions five neurological deviations of brain that can interfere with learning to read. First, brain injury at birth. So those with obvious motor difficulties like cerebral palsy are comparatively easy to identify. Many cases of minimal birth injury to the brain shows no obvious physical handicaps, but there is impairment of of the ability to master language and reading. Second, injury to the brain tissue during childhood by diseases such as encephalitis. So one such case was a normal youngster who lost his ability to speak following a high fever at the age of 2. So from then on, all his language functions developed slowly, and learning to read required much effort for several years. Third, rare cases of congenital and acquired brain defects. Fourth, a pattern of growth in which the brain matures in an irregular pattern, with some functions developing normally and others much delayed. So sometimes referred to as developmental lag. This relates to the concept of dyslexia. Fifth, inadequacy of brain functioning due to some biochemical peculiarity without any defect in brain tissue. Okay, so central processing dysfunction should be suspected when the child exhibits these behaviors. First, read considerably below potential. Second, has a poor visual motor coordination. Like for example, the child has difficulty printing, writing, and drawing. Third, reverse letters and orders of letters in words or changes the order of sounds in words in reading. Fourth, poor in organizing work. And fifth, often appears clumsy and awkward. So, sixth is hyperactive and constantly in motion or restless. Third, distractible, has short attention span. Eighth, has difficulty in shifting from one activity to another and repeats the same behavior over and over. Ninth, impulsive. Tenth, slow in finishing work. 11, often shows a lag in maturation. So, let's talk about cerebral dominance. So, humans usually initiate motor activity from one side of the body, even though they are bilateral or two-sided. So, by the time children enter school, they already show a consistent preference for their right or left hand, as well as preferences in the use of eyes and feet. So these preferences are called laterality and sidedness. So laterality implies that one hemisphere of the brain is more important in behavior or functions more efficiently than the other side. So the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, while the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. So there are several types of cerebral dominance, as manifested by preferred use of hand, eye, ear, and foot. So first is the left dominance. So in left dominance, the left hemisphere of the brain is dominant, making the person right-handed, right-eyed, right-eared, and right-footed. So second, the right dominance. So in right dominance, the right hemisphere of the brain is dominant. Thus, the person is left-handed, left-eyed, left-eared, and left-footed. So third is the cross dominance. So cross dominance, when people have a dominant hand on one side and dominant eye on the other. So right-handed and left-eyed. So we can easily test whether a child has crossed or mixed dominance to determine hand dominance. Observe which hand the child uses to throw a ball, right, or open a door. So to tell eye dominance, observe which eye the child uses to look through microscope or telescope or an open cylinder formed by a roll of paper. Then, for foot dominance, observe which foot the child uses to kick a ball. And for air dominance, observe which ear the child uses in answering the phone. Okay. Next, the fourth is lack of dominance. When people do not have a consistent preference for an eye, hand, or foot, implying no dominant cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so may dangan yung lack of dominance. Okay, the next is dyslexia. Dyslexia, what, why, and how. Okay, so dyslexia came from the word "dys," which means poor or inadequate in the learning or the mastery of, and then the lexia, which means verbal language. So dyslexia is poor in verbal language. So it is a disorder manifested by difficulty in learning to read despite conventional instruction, inadequate intelligence, and socio-cultural opportunity. It is dependent upon fundamental cognitive disabilities, which are frequently of constitutional origin. So, the single most important hallmark of dyslexia is underachievement in writing and reading skills, according to Orton 1985. So, dyslexics may be clumsy, or they may have beautiful coordination except for handling a pencil. So, they often find organization like managing their life difficult, homework instruction, sense of direction or time, the sequence of things to do often get mixed up. Frequently, they belong to families who have found language hard to master in various ways, like reading, writing, and spelling, especially. So, one thing we should remember, we should not label a child as dyslexic unless extensive tests and observations have been done. So, diagnosis. To deal successfully with dyslexics, an early and accurate diagnosis is needed. First, the parent or teacher becomes aware that a problem in reading exists. The child is often referred to a physician who investigates the cause of the problem. If indicated, the child is referred to a neurological exam, and if dyslexia is suspected, further evaluation is made by a psychoeducational specialist. So, intervention. Three main approaches have been identified in dealing with dyslexia according to Scoop 1993. First, the development approach simply intensifies conventional methods of instruction. Second, the corrective approach, which emphasizes the dyslexic's assets and interests. And third, the remedial approach, which focuses on the deficiencies. So, educational research on dyslexia suggests that reading skills can be improved to some degree, but they also indicate that problems tend to persist in adulthood. So, improvement is more substantial for individuals with high overall intelligence, these severe reading problems, and no neurological impairment. So, that's all. Thank you.